Professor Oded Lifshitz from the Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures at Tel Aviv University is inviting you to join him to a journey following those who composed the historical descriptions in the Hebrew Bible.
The Untold Story of the Kingdom of Judah, Part D. The Untold Stories of the Kingdom of Israel, Chapter 5. Lists of kings and memories of murders, rebellions, and changes of dynasties. Information on the first kings of Israel. In this chapter, I will examine the stories about the first kings of Israel and the royal houses that rose and fell in Israel before the establishment of the Omride Dynasty at the beginning of the 9th century BCE. The house of Jeroboam, the house of Baasha and King Zimri, the latter of whom reigned over Israel for only a few days before he was murdered by Omri, who founded a dynasty that succeeded for the first time in stabilizing the situation and reigned in Israel for several decades. I will show that the biblical historiographer had only limited information about the four kings who reigned between Jeroboam and Omri: Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, Baasha, the son of Ahijah, Elah, the son of Baasha, and Zimri, the commander of half the chariotry. This limited information resulted from the lists of kings that were available to the historiographer, and he incorporated this information mainly in the opening and closing formulae. The additional information that was incorporated into the description concerned murders of kings, rebellions, and changes of dynasties. These issues were central to each of the kingdoms in the ancient Near East, and they were kept in memory, told from generation to generation, and written down. Their main details may have been added to the lists of kings alongside the year of each king's reign. The historiographers integrated the information they had into their general historical framework. Therefore, the description of all the first kings of Israel is very short and hardly includes any additional details beyond the opening and closing formulae, which add to the information about the murders, rebellions, and changes of dynasties. If a few additional details were given, for example about wars between Israel and Judah, they stemmed from the information the historiographer had about the first kings of Judah, who reigned at the same time as the first kings of Israel. As described in the previous chapters, the historiographers had additional information about the kings of Judah that resulted mainly from their close familiarity with objects and places that preserved memories, such as, for example, the information about the fortification of the city of Mitzpah in the days of King Asa of Judah, after he was able to withstand the pressure of King Baasha of Israel. Following all this, a later editor added to the brief historical account prophecies that herald the end of the dynasties. These prophecies were planted in a way such that God's control over history is demonstrated and illustrated through the literary device of the prophecy and its fulfillment. In order to achieve the goal of this literary device, the prophecies of prophets, mostly unknown prophets, were integrated into the story towards its beginning. To emphasize their fulfillment, a note was added to the description, always next to the description of the fulfillment of the prophecy, and which connects the destruction of the dynasty to the prophecy with the saying, according to the words of Yahweh. Let's explore the details. According to the biblical description, and only according to this description, since there are no other sources for this, before the establishment of the Omride Dynasty, the process of establishing a territorial kingdom in Israel had already begun. But apparently it was a weak, small, insignificant kingdom in the surrounding area. This kingdom, known as mentioned only from the biblical description, was characterized by rapid changes of dynasties, so that no dynasty was able to establish itself and survive for more than 1 or 2 generations. In 2 cases, the dynasty of Jeroboam and the dynasty of Baasha, the second king, Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, and Elah, the son of Baasha, reigned only a year or 2 before being murdered. And in the third case, Zimri reigned merely 7 days. Only Omri succeeded for the first time in establishing a dynasty of kings that reigned in Israel for several decades. We will discuss this in the next chapter. 7 verses are dedicated in the book of Kings. I'm talking about the first book of Kings, chapter 15, verses 25 to 31, to the reign of Nadab, the son of Jeroboam. 2 of which include the opening formula, verses 25 and 26. 1 of which includes the closing formula, verse 31. And the other 4 verses are devoted to the description of the conspiracy against him, his murder, and the elimination of the house of Jeroboam. To these 7 verses is added a comment in verse 32. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. This relates to the extensive description of the days of King Asa of Judah about the war between Israel and Judah during this period, which will be discussed later. The opening formula for the description of Nadab includes the duration of his reign, 2 years, and the synchronistic calculation with the reign of King Asa of Judah, and this is in verse 25. I'm quoting, "And Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah, and he reigned over Israel 2 years." From this verse, it appears that Nadab reigned for between 1 and 2 years, since even though the opening formula about him indicates 2 years of reign, and he reigned over Israel 2 years, it also states that he ascended to the kingship in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah. But, according to the description in verse 28, so Baasha killed him in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his stead. It's clearly that it's not full 2 years. Also, in the ending formula of Nadab's reign in verse 33, it says that in the 3rd year of King Asa, king of Judah, Baasha, the son of Ahijah, began to reign over all Israel at Tirzah and reigned 24 years. The conclusion is not only that Nadab reigned between 1 and 2 years, but also that synchronistic calculations seem to have been made by the editors of the description. Additionally, at least regarding the kingdom of Israel, if a king reigned for more than a full year, 2 years of reign were attributed to him, even if clearly, at least in the case of Nadab, that the 2nd year of reign was partial. The opening formula about Nadab also includes his theological evaluation, and this is in verse 26. I'm quoting, "He did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and walked in the way of his father, and in his sin which he made Israel to sin." This formula is special in that Nadab is not said to have walked in the way of Jeroboam like all the kings of Israel, almost without exception. Rather, the emphasis is on being a descendant of Jeroboam and walked in the way of his father. The closing formula of Nadab in verse 31 includes the usual reference to the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. I'm quoting, "Now the rest of the acts of Nadab and all that he did, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel?" The only historical detail given about the short reign of Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, is that he was murdered during the siege of the city of Gibeon by the Israeli army. And I'm quoting from chapter 15, verse 27. Baasha, the son of Ahijah of the house of Issachar, conspired against him. and Baasha struck him down at Gibton, which belonged to the Philistines. For Nadab and all Israel were laying siege on Gibton. According to the description, Nadab was with the Israelite army that besieged the city of Gibton, and we might assume that Baasha was one of the commanders of the army over there. He was not content with the murdering the king, I'm quoting, and as soon as he was king, he killed all the house of Jeroboam. He left to the house of Jeroboam not one that breathed, until he had destroyed it. This is verse 29. Through this, the prophecy that was planted in the description of the days of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, in chapter 14, verse 7 to verse 11, was fulfilled in its entirety. And I'm quoting from the prophecy. Therefore, behold, I will bring evil upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam every male, both bond and free in Israel, and will utterly consume the house of Jeroboam as a man burns up dung until it is all gone. Anyone belonging to Jeroboam who dies in the city, the dogs shall eat. And anyone who dies in the open country, the birds of the air shall eat. For Yahweh has spoken it. The first royal house in the kingdom of Israel was destroyed. And in order to connect the prophecy with its fulfillment, a comment was added in chapter 15, verse 29, according to which the destruction of Jeroboam took place according to the words of Yahweh, which is spoken by his servant Ahijah the Shilonites. Potentially, as in other cases in the ancient Near East, rebellions and changes of dynasties were remembered in history and received special attention, perhaps even being recorded in the list of kings and including the place and the name of the conspirer. This might have been the historiographer's source here as well. He might have known nothing about the second king in Israel and the Jeroboam dynasty other than some information about the conspiracy, murder, and destruction of the dynasty. The second royal house in Israel was founded by Baasha, who, according to the first book of Kings, chapter 15, verse 27, was of the tribe of Issachar. His origin seems to hint at the reason for the removal of the Ephrathite dynasty, providing evidence of tribal and regional conflicts, apparently between the hill country tribes, Ephraim, and the tribes in the northern Samaria and the Jezreel and Beit Shean valleys, which is Issachar. Baasha reigned in Israel for 24 years, and despite this long reign, there are almost no details about him either. The description of the years of his reign includes 8 verses. Of these, 2 verses are an opening formula, which is chapter 15, verses 33 and 34. 2 verses are a closing formula, chapter 16, verses 5 and 6. And 4 verses include the prophecy that was planted about the end of the dynasty of Baasha, and this is chapter 16, verse 1 to 4. Apart from these formulae and the prophecy about the end of the dynasty, one historical detail was given about Baasha's long reign. He is the king who moved the capital from Shechem to Tirzah, this is according to chapter 15, verse 33, where he was also buried, according to chapter 16, verse 6. A description of Baasha's settlement in Tirzah is also given in the description of the day of Asa, the king of Judah, and in chapter 15, verse 21, they say, "And when Baasha heard of it, he stopped building Ramah, and he dwelt in Tirzah." This formulaic description: in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, Baasha, the son of Ahijah, began to reign over all Israel at Tirzah, and reigned 24 years. And Baasha slept with his fathers and was buried at Tirzah, and Elah his son reigned in his stead. These are indication that the author didn't have any additional information about the days of Baasha or about the capital in Tirzah, which according to the biblical description disappeared from the stage of history immediately after the establishment of the Omride Dynasty and the transfer of the capital of the kingdom of Israel from Tirzah to Samaria. However, the comment preserved in Song of Songs in chapter 6 verse 4, "You are beautiful as Tirzah, my love, comely as Jerusalem, terrible as an army with banners." This indicates the fragments of memory that were preserved about the ancient capital of Israel, Tirzah. The city of Tirzah is identified with Tel El Farah north, and an archaeological analysis of the excavations finding at the site indeed indicate the establishment of a prosperous city in the second half of the 10th century BCE, which was destroyed shortly after its establishment, apparently when the capital of the kingdom of Israel was moved to Samaria by King Omri in the beginning of the 9th century BCE. Another note was added about Baasha, and this is in chapter 15, verse 32, which was deliberately planted after the closing formula about the days of Nadab's reign and before the opening formula about his own days. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. This comment is linked to the relatively detailed information that was written in the description of the reign of Asa, king of Judah, in which exactly the same comment was written in verse 16. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. But this comment in the description of King Asa of Judah, even before the story moves on to describe of the stories of the kingdom of Israel, the days of Nadab, son of Jeroboam, and Baasha, who conspired against him and ascended to the throne, serves as an opening for a 6 verses description that discusses as a starting point for the story of Baasha's pressure on the northern border of Judah, and this is in verse 17. Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah that he might permit no one to go out or to come in to Asa, king of Judah. Due to Judah's weakness, Asa's solution was to call the help of the king of Aram Damascus, and I can read from verses 18 and 19. Then Asa took all the silver and the gold that were left in the treasures of the house of Yahweh and the treasures of the king's house, and gave them into the hands of his servants. And King Asa sent them to Ben-Hadad, the son of Tabrimon, the son of Hezion, king of Aram, who dwelt in Damascus, saying, "Let there be a league between me and you, as between my father and your father. Behold, I am sending to you a bribe of silver and gold. Go, break your league with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may withdraw from me." The definition of the silver and the gold as bribe expresses the position of the historiographer of the days of Josiah regarding the Judean king's payment for the request for help from the king of Aram Damascus. And indeed, the historiographers used the exact same term when describing the appeal of Ahaz, who asked for the help of the king of Assyria, and this is according to the first book of Kings, chapter 16, verses 7 and 8. In any case, according to the description of Ben-Hadad's reaction, was to strike the king of Israel as it in the northern border. In verse 20, I can read, "And Ben-Hadad hearkened to King Asa, and he sent the commanders of his armies against the cities of Israel, and conquered Iyon, Dan, Abel Bet Maacha, and all Kinneret, with all the land of Naphtali." This attack the description of which I doubt reflects historical reality and potentially was drawn from the information that the Jerusalem historiographers had about the Assyrian attacks against the kingdom of Israel around 150 years later, made it so that Baasha was forced to stop pressuring Judah. And in verse 21 it's written, "And when Baasha heard of it, he stopped building Ramah, and he dwelt in Tirzah." Notably, this was the time when Asa could fortify the border of Judah. And in verse 22, indeed, they say, "Then King Asa made a proclamation to all of Judah. None was exempt, and they carried away the stones of Ramah and its timber with which Baasha had been building, and with them King Asa built Geba of Benjamin and Mitzpah." The information about the war between Asa and Baasha and the memory of the construction of Mitzpah with the stones of Ramah following Baasha's retreat was preserved in Judah, and perhaps in this case too, the memory of these events didn't stem from ancient texts, but from memory-bearing places and objects. In this case, the memory was related to the fortifications that continue to exist in Mitzpah, Telenatzbe, from the period of its construction during the days of Asa until the end of Judah's existence 300 years later. This memory is also preserved in the description of Jeremiah 41, which state that a few weeks after the destruction of Jerusalem and 2 days after the murder of Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, and of Ishmael, the son of Netaniah, a large delegation of people came from Shechem, Shiloh, and Samaria. When they came into the city, Ishmael, the son of Netaniah, and the men with him slew them and cast them into a cistern. This is in Jeremiah 41, verse 7. And we're talking about events that happened in 586 BCE, 300 years later than the time of Asa. The text continued to state that now the cistern into which Ishmael cast all the bodies of the men whom he had slain was the large cistern which King Asa had made for defense against Baasha, king of Israel. Ishmael, the son of Netaniah, filled it with slain. This description implies that it is the memory of the fortification of Mitzpah that preserved the story of the circumstances of the war between Israel and Judah in the days of Asa and Baasha. In my opinion, this was also the source of the description in the book of Kings, which recounts in detail the description of the days of Asa and only briefly describes of the days of Baasha. Similar to Jeroboam, Baasha was also given a prophecy about the end of the dynasty. The words of the prophet Yehu, the son of Hanani, who is mentioned only in this description here, are also quoted in the description of the days of Baasha in chapter 16, verse 1 to 4, and in words very similar to the prophecy spoken by Ahijah about Jeroboam and his dynasty. And I'm quoting, "And the word of Yahweh came to Yehu, the son of Hanani, against Baasha, saying, Since I exalted you out of the dust and made you leader over my people Israel, and you have walked in the way of Jeroboam and have made my people Israel to sin, provoking me to anger with their sins, behold, I will utterly sweep away Baasha and his house, and I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. Anyone belonging to Baasha who dies in the city, the dogs shall eat, and anyone who dies in the field, the birds of the air shall eat." In the scene between the description of the days of Baasha and the short description of the short reign of his son Elah, a linking and clarifying note was added, and this is in chapter 16, verse 7. "Moreover, The word of Yahweh came by the prophet Yehu, the son of Hanani, against Baasha and his house, both because of all the evil that he did in the sight of Yahweh, provoking him to anger with the work of his hands, in being like the house of Jeroboam, and also because he destroyed it. The conspiracy against them and the destruction of the entire dynasty is summed up in accordance with the prophecy in chapter 16, verse 11. When he began to reign, as soon as he had seated himself on his throne, he killed all the house of Baasha. He didn't leave him a single male of his kinsmen or his friends. End of quote. And even prior to Elah's closing formula, a comment linking this destruction to the prophecy is added, and this is in verses 12 and 13, and I'm quoting. Thus, Zimri destroyed all the house of Baasha according to the words of Yahweh, which he spoke against Baasha by Yehu the prophet. For all the sins of Baasha and the sins of Elah his son, which they sinned, and which they made Israel to sin, provoking Yahweh, God of Israel, to anger with their idols. End of quote. After Baasha's murder, his son Elah ascended to the throne, and similarly to Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, he is also said in his opening formula in chapter 16, verse 8, to have reigned for 2 years, although from the calculation of his synchronism, he reigned may have been shorter, maybe a little bit more than a year. Elah ascended the throne in the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, and according to the description in verses 9 and 10, I'm quoting, but his servant Zimri, commander of half his chariots, conspired against him. When he was in Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, who was over the household in Tirzah, Zimri came and he struck him down and killed him in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his stead. This act of murder took place at the same time when the Israelite army was besieging the city of Gibton, and Zimri was an army man who was commander of half the chariots. The background to the rebellion against Elah is unknown, but Zimri's act remains etched in memory as a particularly vile one. It is mentioned not only in the historiographical description here, but also in the description of Yehu's rebellion when Jezebel receives Yehu's greetings and saying in 2 Kings chapter 9 verse 31, and as Yehu entered the gate, she said, "Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?" Nothing is known about Elah's short period of reign, except for the opening and closing formulae and the information about Zimri's conspiracy. And here too, it seems that the information about the murder of the king and changes of dynasties was preserved as part of the lists of the kings, which recorded the dry, chronicled, detailed about the place of the murder and its circumstances. The combination of this brief information with the later additions of the prophecies and their fulfillment, which link all the events of God's rule of history and to the rewards of all who followed the path of Jeroboam, is heavily featured in the descriptions of the first kings of Israel. We see again and again that these are the only details of information that were known to the Jerusalem historiographers hundreds of years later. These are exactly the pieces of information that are described in relative detail about the time between Zimri's ascension to the throne, his 7 days reign, and Omri's establishing himself on the throne at Tirzah. Zimri, who according to chapter 16 verse 9 was commander of half the chariots, apparently took advantage of the situation that the army, perhaps together with officers who were loyal to the house of Baasha, was still busy besieging Gibton, And when the king was at Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, who was over the household in Tirzah, Zimri came and struck him down and killed him in the 27th year of Asa king of Judah, and reigned in his stead. According to verse 15, Zimri reigned 7 days in Tirzah. Now the troops were encamped against Gibeon, which belonged to the Philistines. However, the leaders of the people and the army didn't recognize his kingship, and while they were besieging Gibeon, they anointed Omri, who came up from the campaign in the lowlands to Tirzah to seize power, and this is according to description in verses 16 and 17. And then they said, the troops who were encamped heard it said, Zimri has conspired and he has killed the king. Therefore, all Israel made Omri, the commander of the army, king over Israel, that day in the camp. So Omri went up from Gibeon, and all Israel with him, and they besieged Tirzah. Apparently, there was no real siege of Tirzah, and it is doubtful whether there was an army loyal to Zimri in the city, which could have defended it from the Israelite army led by Omri. But Zimri's end was cruel, violent, and surprising. And according to verse 18, I'm quoting, and when Zimri saw that the city was taken, he went into the citadel of the king's house and burned the king's house over him with fire and died. This was the beginning of a 4-year civil war, because following the death of Zimri, a new candidate for the throne arose, Tibni, the son of Ginat. There is no information about him, but clearly he managed to gather a military power and counteract Omri and his army for 4 years, a surprisingly long time. Is it possible that this Tibni was close to the house of Jeroboam and was supported by the tribe of Ephraim against Omri and the tribe of Issachar? We don't know anything about it, but here too we can learn how much the murder of kings, civil wars, and changes of dynasties aroused interest in the circle of scribes and among those who recorded the histories of the king, just as we know this for the Assyrian kings list, for example. It is possible that the details recorded by the Deuteronomistic historiographers were taken as is from the list available to them, and apart from that, they didn't seem to know any additional details. In the next chapter, we'll move on to the description of the events of the great kings Omri and Ahab, who succeeded in establishing the first stable dynasty of the kings of Israel and raised the kingdom to the stage of a regional history. There, we will not only see what has been described, but also get to know another source, the only one that was available to the writers of history, the stories of the prophets, and especially those of Elijah and Elisha, who largely shaped the historiographer's view of these kings. See you in the next chapter.